Hi, my name's Dawn Davies. I'm the head buyer for the Whiskey Exchange. And we thought we'd have a bit of fun today because it's Valentine's Day and well, some of us are maybe not with our partners, some of us can't be with our partners, some of us are single, and some of us are just fed up with spending so much time with our partners that we wanted to share Valentine's Day with a whole bunch of other people as well. So welcome, and we're going to just talk a little bit about, well, today the pack is chocolate and different spirits. So just to give you kind of the reason that I will be doing this class is that my background is actually, well, I was a sommelier. I worked for restaurants like Zuma, I worked for Gordon Ramsay, I worked for the Square, and then I opened and ran the Ledbury for 2 years before I joined Selfridges and then eventually here. So food and wine pairing, or food and drinks pairing, has been in my blood for the last over 20 years now, and it's something I really, really love to do. So I thought, you know what, it's Valentine's Day, let's have a bit of fun. Let's try just pairing a bit of chocolate and some, in my head in the beginning, I was like, chocolate and whiskey, yes, nice and easy, bam, 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 bish, bash, bosh. And so I came down to this bar, so I'm allowed to come into work because I can drive, and I am literally the only person in the building right now besides the security guard. And I came down to the bar, and I kind of, behind me is a whole array of different whiskies, and I started sort of tasting the chocolates. I pulled something down off the shelf that I was like, yeah, that'll work. And then I was like, it doesn't work. Okay, right. So then I thought, well, why be normal? Let's just go rogue, which is my normal state of affairs. And I thought, let's pull some other stuff off. So I tasted the chocolates and I was like, just looked behind me and I said, okay, what would work with that? Because actually the thing with chocolate by its nature is quite hard to pair with. Even though people talk about pairing chocolate all the time, the reason chocolate's quite hard to pair with is because you get this coating on your palate from the chocolate itself. So you actually need something, and that's why spirits do pair really, really well with chocolate, or anything with a higher ABV, because it cuts through that sort of mouth coating character of the chocolate. The other problem is sweetness. And what I was finding actually, that the chocolates here are quite sweet, even the fillings are quite sweet. And I was like, every time I tried to pair it with some, maybe a whiskey, like a sherried whiskey, that I was like, yeah, that should work, it kind of made the whiskey taste drying. And for me, the most important thing about food and drink pairing is that you enhance the flavors of both. You know, I'm very vehement about cheese. Everyone's like, cheese and a good claret. No, wrong. Cheese depends on what type of cheese. So a goat's cheese works beautifully with Sauvignon Blanc. A hard cheese, like a Comté, works quite nicely with a Bordeaux. So, you know, it really, really depends on what's in the flavor. And especially with the chocolates, if you have a dark chocolate, something with quite a high cacao content, like a 70%, that's when it starts to work really, really well with a whole array of spirits, because that sugar levels just dropped a little bit. You get a little bit more bitterness, you get a bit more dryness from the chocolate, which allows that spirit to come through and work. Sweet wine, of course, certain types of sweet wines, port, we'll taste one of those, again, works really, really well with chocolate. So just kind of think about what's in that chocolate. You know, we've got one with passion fruit in it. Now, whiskey's not going to work with passion fruit. That could be, well, some whiskies might, if they have kind of a passion fruity note, like an old Bowmore or something like that. But actually, in general, it's quite a hard flavor to pair with. So I had to kind of think outside the box a little bit on that. Then there were other flavors that were quite dominant, like ginger is quite a strong, strong flavor. So, you know, always think about what is, and that's true for food pairings as well. So say you have, you know, a steak, but you've got it with like a mushroom sauce. Yes, a lot of people think, okay, it's steak, it's protein, I need to go for a big heavy red, but maybe that mushroom sauce will actually lead you down a road into maybe a Rhone wine, like a Chateauneuf de Pape or something that's got a little bit of savory character, rather than say an Argentine Malbec. So, you know, always think not only of the protein, but also the sauces that are going around it. And that includes chocolates. Think about the flavors within the chocolates. So the first one that I want you to have a little go at is the gin. So this is the Wacholderba, and it's a really interesting gin. It's from Austria. Wacholderba is the name of the bear that was going around Syria and Austria, and they used to eat the juniper, so it was called a juniper bear. And this is actually made with Grüne grapes as one of the kind of main ingredients. So it gives you, Grüne gives you this lovely kind of round, almost like an Albarino, kind of soft, ripe flavors, a little bit peachy notes. And then you've got saffron in there as well. So it gives you it's quite an interesting flavor. Saffron, as you know, has this slightly kind of earthy character to it. So when I kind of sort of was looking at the chocolates, and the first one I want you to try is actually the saffron and ginger. And I looked at that one and I thought, okay, so when we're tasting, what I want you to do, first I want you to have a little taste of the chocolate. Then I want you to go to the spirit, kind of keep it in your mouth a bit, and then go back to the chocolate. So, you know, when I looked at the saffron and ginger, when I taste it, and excuse me for talking my mouth full, texturally, this is quite mouth coating. And it's very, very sweet. And you only get that the ginger's quite delicate here. And then you get this little bit of that earthy saffron that I was talking about earlier. And I was like, what am I going to pair with this? Because it's quite an interesting flavor. And I just happened to see the saffron gin. I thought, why not? Let's have a go at it. So if you taste this gin, and most people would think gin and chocolate, that's a bit of a weird one. But because this gin's quite fruity, because of that Grüne grape, it's almost a bit more like an eau de vie because you've got this roundness, you've got this suppleness to it. And so mouth coating is a textural thing. It works really, really well with the texture of the chocolate. And then you have that little bit of saffron lift. So what I was doing here is I was actually taking two quite similar textures and two quite similar flavors and sort of marrying them together. And I think because this isn't very juniper heavy, there is juniper there, which gives you the dryness, but it's got quite a lot of sweetness. It's got a nice savory note to it. I think if you put this chocolate with, say, a Tanqueray 10, quite a big dry style gin, it would fight it because you don't have enough of that sweetness, that fruit, that ripeness that for me, I'm looking for this chocolate. I mean, I don't know, guys, if you have any comments, pop them in the chat. If you think, oh, that doesn't work at all, my God, what are you doing with gin? You know, if you think, actually, there's something about that I really like, just pop it in the comments. Any tips for choc with a peaty dram? Well, that we will definitely be talking about at the end. So I'm going to hold off on that conversation, that question. And I'll come back to it towards the end because we definitely have a very peaty whiskey at the very end. But so this is kind of rich, kind of sort of that fruit and that rich sweetness and that texture I'm thinking about all the way along. But there's so much fruit, there's so much easiness there. And I think pairing gin and chocolate is quite an interesting one. I would say stick with sort of more fruity gins that aren't as heavy on juniper. Gin liqueurs, of course, could work quite nicely if you've got like fruit-based chocolates, anything like that. But yeah, you know, like it's the whole thing about pairing, for me, pairing food and pairing chocolate or whatever with wine, with spirits, is experimentation. And sometimes the best pairings come from the least expected thing. When we were doing whiskey and chocolate, whiskey and popcorn, I decided for a whiskey show we were going to do whiskey and popcorn pairing. And my favorite pairing of all was the Madras chili popcorn, which in itself sounds fairly random. And I paired it with this amazing, quite fruity kind of dram. And it was just kind of one of those eureka moments where you think, oh my goodness, I've nailed it. And I had the biggest smile on my face for the longest time because I was just so excited. And I think that's what happens when you start learning about food and drink pairing. It becomes this kind of almost a challenge to yourself to get it absolutely right. But, you know, at the end of the day, you should always drink what you want with food. It's not necessarily about the best match, but about what's the best match for you. So if we move on to the next one. So the next drink I want you guys to look at is the Capovilla. And I'm going to pair this one with the passion fruit. And so I talked to you guys about the passion fruit earlier, that think about passion fruit as a flavor. Sorry, what chocolate? We are on the passion fruit chocolate, which is on the box, the one that is a kind of circular one with a little kind of squirrel at the top. So the passion fruit chocolate. And it's going with the Capovilla. Now, for me, one of the kind of the hardest thing with passion fruit is passion fruit, one, has acidity. So even when you're pairing, say, a passion fruit dessert or anything like that, that acidity is super hard. Plus, if you think about passion fruit as a flavor in itself, it's a big, intense, really strong flavor. So anything you put up against it has to also be quite strong, quite vibrant in flavor. So say you had a passion fruit based dessert, I might be tempted to go with something like an ice wine, because ice wine for me has a lovely fruit to it. It has that texture, it has the acidity, because you kind of want to play around with that acidity. You don't want something uber high in acid, you know, that sweetness has to balance it. Everything's about balance, about kind of going back and forth and shaping the taste. And when I first tried this, and I actually said, just try the chocolate on its own, just have a little nibble. I very rarely eat chocolate, so by the end of this, I'm going to be hyper as hell. I feel very, very sorry that I have anyone that's in my path today. Sugar in me is not a good thing. Now, straight away, what is ice wine? This is a great question. I'll chat a little bit about the Capovilla, and then I'll definitely come back to that, because ice wine, if you've never had it, is something you definitely have to have. So, you know, when you taste that chocolate, you get the acidity. You get that whack of passion fruit, but then you get this dark chocolate. So this one was super hard. And I kind of went back and forth on this one quite a lot. So in the end, actually, I thought to myself, well, what I need is something fruit-based, because I've got this massive whack of fruit, but I need something to cut through, but I need something really, really good quality. And one of my absolute favorite producers in Italy is a gentleman called Vittorio Capovilla. Capo is one of the most talented and beautiful people on the planet. He makes these incredible distillados and these incredible grappas, and this is his prune one. And if you go online, go on Capovilla, and you'll see the amazing fruits and everything he used. And I tried it with the peach one, and then I thought, you know what, I actually want something that's a little bit darker. So prune I thought was going to work really well. So if you have a little bite of your chocolate again, which is now going all over the floor. And then this is one of those tastings that that prune has just got enough weight of flavor, because he's such an amazing distiller. The prune is not fighting with the passion fruit. I'm not trying to pair two identical flavors. The prune is there just to support that dark chocolate. The richness is there to support that creaminess again on the texture of the passion fruit cream. But at the end, I get flavors from both. And I actually, for me, this is helping the chocolate, because it's actually bringing to the fore the dark chocolate, which I think I want more of, because that passion fruit is so sweet. So by bringing through a little bit more of that bitterness of the dark chocolate with the pairing, I'm actually kind of lifting both up, which is super important. So I think that if you go back to this one and go back a little bit on this one, because it's still quite dry, but there's so much fruit there. So what's an ice wine? So ice wine is a type of a style of wine. It's a sweet wine. You normally find it in very, very cold countries, hence ice wine. So it's very famous from areas in Canada, in Austria and Germany, the three main areas. You can get it elsewhere. And what happens is you leave the grapes on the vine for a very, very long time. And then it gets into November, December, even January, and the grapes freeze. So you harvest the grapes when they're still frozen, you take them into the winery, you press them straight away. Now, what happens when grapes freeze is that the water inside the grape freezes, not the fruit juice, because of the sugar content. So you're getting this amazingly concentrated juice with no dilution from the water that is naturally present in the grape. So they're very, very rich, powerful wines, and really fabulous acidity. So for me, they're super good for pairing with desserts, especially anything fruit-based. You can even use them with chocolate. It's really, really good. So how does everyone find that pairing? Was that quite interesting? Was that different? Did you like the spirit? Because I mean, for me, he's such a fantastic producer. I could just drink this all the time. And you know, this is one I want you to come back a little bit to, because for me, this is one that will work with a lot of different chocolates, especially the darker chocolates. If you try that, and actually for fun, go back and try that first chocolate with this. And you know, it's also good to try things that don't work. So if I had that ginger again, that's sweet and sweet. If I then taste that prune, it suddenly feels that spirit feels so much drier. I can't taste the flavors. And that's an example where two things are fighting each other. And it's always good to see when things fight with each other as much as when they pair, because then you start to understand that some things make foods taste worse, some things make drinks taste worse. And that's a lot to do, again, with that texture, that sweetness. I need a dark chocolate with that prune eau de vie, because otherwise it's just that sweetness is going to be too sweet for the spirit itself, because you're fighting sugar with something slightly drier. If you have high sugar, you need something with high sugar normally with it, just to pair together with it. So, shall we go on to the second? Did everyone have a little bit of the other chocolate to try, just to kind of get a bit of comparison? Do you see what I mean? You kind of get this really drying sensation. It's not pleasant, and that's the thing, you know, go back, try, and that's where the fun is with food pairing. You can keep on going, and you know, trust me, there is enough chocolate. You're not going to be lacking chocolate by the end of this. So, you know, go back and forth, try the different ones, because you actually might find that there's one pairing in here that I haven't paired together, but you've paired, that you think, oh, wow, this is incredible. This works so much better than the one she did, which is, again, something that you can definitely have a play with. So I'm talking of sugar. I talked about sugar earlier, and that, you know, if you look at a milk chocolate, and the next one we're going to try is the caramel and it's the honey caramel milk chocolate. The honey caramel milk chocolate, which is the round one with the crisscrosses on it. And we're going to have it with the Plantation Fiji, the rum. I don't know if you can see that. My lights are a bit bright in here today. So what I was talking about earlier is milk chocolate. I actually find dark chocolate, as I said earlier, quite easy to pair with things, because the sugar content on a darker chocolate, especially something 70–80%, is much, much lower. So the sugar is not fighting with lack of sugar in a spirit. So when you get these milk chocolates, one, they're a lot more mouth coating, and two, as we all know, in a milk chocolate, there's a higher sugar content. So where you've got a lot of sugar, you need something with a lot of sugar, because you just need to kind of be able to have that drying sensation. You don't want to be fighting with that spirit. Now, the Plantation Fiji, so Plantation is a really interesting company. They own a distillery down in Barbados. They own actually a cognac house, Chateau Ferrand, in the cognac region, and they now have shares in Fiji, in this fabulous rum distillery. So this is all Fijian sugarcane molasses. And Fiji distillery has one of my favorite stories of a rum distillery ever. So in Fiji, they used to ferment the molasses in open tanks. And after a while, they were like, we can no longer ferment in open vats. We're going to have to close the vats. Why? Because there's these birds called minor birds in Fiji. And they're quite partial to a little bit of sugar. And they used to fly onto the fermentation vats, and of course, because they were quite sweet, they would be like, nah. But also at the same time, there was alcohol there. So what would happen? Minor bird would get very drunk, fall into the vats. Not a happy ending for the minor birds. So they actually had to shut the tanks. I think that's just a genius story. And what Plantation does is they samples, you can drink the samples and all the chocolate, you'll be all right, Brian. So, you know, I think with Plantation, what they do is that they age partly in the tropics. And when you're aging in a tropical environment, you're going to have a much greater extraction of alcohol and water out of those barrels because of the heat is pulling out the angel share. And then they take them back to France and they recast them into French oak, and then they age them for a further year there. So you're just slowing down that aging process in a funny way. Not quite that, but in a funny way, yes. And then what they do is they add a dosage to the rum. Now, you might think, rum, already made from sugar, going to be quite sweet? Yes. But a lot of places actually add a little bit more sugar in the end, just to bring up the sweetness levels in the rum. So this has what we call about 16 grams per litre residual sugar. And that's why actually for me, it makes a perfect partner for quite a sweet chocolate. So if we have a little bit, and this is definitely sweet. I mean, this one will, if anything finishes me off, it's this one, because you've got that sort of honey caramel, which is already very, very sweet. And then, so with this, what I wanted to do was one, to be able to balance that sweetness, both from that honey caramel and from the milk chocolate. But also I wanted to bring that honey flavor out a bit more, because when I first tasted, just if your partner doesn't mind, you putting your finger in the caramel and just tasting the caramel, not the chocolate, that honey's not really very prevalent. The minute I take my rum, I feel that it just elevates that chocolate again. I'm bringing out that honey note out of the rum. I've got this really lovely, bright, tropical fruit note. It's a really, really fruity rum. And I just needed it. And actually, if you want to go back and try it with the passion fruit, because one of my original thoughts was maybe I might pair this with the passion fruit. And it actually does also work quite nicely, because that passion fruit is actually bringing out the fruit in the rum. But I just felt that for me, just that little bit of sort of sweetness on that honey just elevated both. Now I'm going back to that passion fruit. It's actually giving me more of the passion fruit flavors than maybe potentially the Capovilla did. The Capovilla just kind of enhances bitter chocolate notes, that dark chocolate note. Whereas this one brings out that passion fruit flavor because you've got that tropical note in the rum itself, but that little bit of sugar. And I did try this with a rum that had no dosage, and it just didn't quite work. It was just fighting it a little bit, you know, just giving a little too much of that kind of dryness on my palate with a rum that didn't have that little bit of sweetness. So anything that, like a rum works super well with food, especially things like sort of rum babas, of course, you know, anything that's kind of sponge or dried or like a sort of dried fruit cake, anything like that, rum's really, really going to pair well with. And for me, again, it's one of those ones, if you have a dark chocolate, works super well, especially if I have an aged rum from either somewhere like Venezuela or from, say, Barbados. And if you want something to go with a little bit more tropical fruits, then somewhere like Fiji or Jamaica works really, really well. So anything that's got that tropical note, then bring a more tropical kind of flavored rum in, which definitely for me is Jamaica and Fiji. But I really like this one, and I think this actually, and this is where I think, oh no, maybe we'll do one more and then I'll bring in one of the bonus bowl chocolates. But this is one where that fruit from the spirit is just bringing that chocolate alive and actually being able to cut through that quite creamy character of the chocolate, because that honey caramel is just so kind of rich and mouth coating again. So 3 very, very different spirits doing 3 very, very different things with the different chocolates. And at the end of this, really just go back and play around, because you will definitely see some work better with some work absolutely terribly with others, and it's quite an interesting thing to pair. Now, recently I've become, well, not recently, I've always loved it, but I've kind of come back to it, and it's Calvados. So Calvados is a spirit I absolutely love. And Calvados is, of course, from the Normandy region of France. This one's made by a gentleman called Pierre Huet, and it's from the Pays d'Auge, so one of the really high quality areas in Calvados. And Calvados is made from apples, and I think apples just got such a lovely flavor, whether it's a cider, whether it's, you could get an iced apple cider, which is just delicious again. And then definitely things like spirits. So you get apple brandies here from, say, Somerset, and of course Calvados. Now, Calvados can have a little bit of pear, but this one actually has 20 different varieties of apples. And what they do in Calvados is they have like different styles of apples. So they have bitter apples, sweet apples, bittersweet apples. And what they do is they take the different characters, the different apples, and they use them to kind of balance out and create this amazing spirit. And this one's been aged for 12 years. It's an hors and for me, it was just kind of, I wanted to bring a Calvados in because I actually think not enough people drink Calvados. It's one of those spirits that's kind of been a little bit lost unless you're a sort of a traveler that goes over to Normandy. Of course, a lot of the Brits go over there on vacation. Hopefully we can go on vacation very soon. But it's definitely one of these things that for me works so well with so many different things. Like if you have an apple tart tatin or an apple crumble, or you have something that's kind of a baked fruit base, Calvados just works really, really well. And with this one, I was like, so I took the ginger chocolate. So this one it's just the pure ginger dark, I think it's called, on your little sheet. And we had that ginger and saffron earlier, which wasn't very strong ginger. Yeah. And has anyone had a stem ginger, which is really, really, really strong? It's intense. Stem ginger is such an absolutely powerful, powerful flavor. So when I kind of tasted this, my immediate thought was to go for something like maybe a sherry influenced whiskey, because it's so big, or a rum, because a spiced rum or something like that has maybe that ginger note. Now this one got that ginger, it's going to stay. You've got that dark chocolate, now have a little bit of the Calvados. And for me, suddenly, thanks Lorna, suddenly the ginger, kind of that warmth from the ginger is there. And it's kind of opened my palate a little bit. So then I just get this lovely fruit. And it's almost like it's just cooling that ginger down a little bit. It's allowing that dark chocolate to come through again, a little bit like the Capovilla did with the passion fruit cream. And I can taste that this, that strength. I mean, this I love. This was probably my slightly eureka moment. And then I decided I was just going to put this with every single chocolate. And then I was like, no, I can't do that. We can't have one spirit and all these chocolates. But it was kind of like, I'd never really thought about pairing Calvados and chocolate. But then as soon as I've done it, now I'm like, hold on, this works so well, because you've got fruit and chocolate is fruity. And you've got sort of the sweetness of that apple. But my camera's decided to go funny. But you've got this lovely dryness as well. So I'm kind of, it's not fighting. And again, if you put this with the milk chocolate, I don't think it would work so well. So I mean, if you want, go back and try it with that honey. It's just going to be a little bit, again, a bit drying on the palate. But you know, that ginger, I mean, ginger is such a beautiful flavor. And actually, if you taste the Calvados, and if you have some water, always good to have a bit of a rinse in between. But now, actually, when I look at that Calvados, I'm like, oh, it does have some spices, some sort of sweet spices, which are just kind of lifting that fruit character. So with something like a Calvados, I would say go for an older Calvados if you're going to look for pairing partner. If you've got something like a young Calvados, like one, we have one called from Avalon, which is fabulous in like a long drink with soda. Absolutely delicious. It's my new summer drink. But Calvados is, again, it's just so easy to pair. I mean, think of maybe pairing, even you could pair Calvados with like a lovely roasted duck, with maybe sort of a nice fresh sauce, pork with an apple sauce. You know, it can take some kind of bigger, richer flavors, because by its nature it is quite big and rich. And then if you go into an area in Calvados called Don Fronte, where there's a little bit more pear into the proportion of the distillate, it's even bigger, it's even richer, it's even more fruity. So you could do even kind of more big fruity flavors with it. But a really, really fun thing. I think it's just a little bit different. Yes, Normandy pheasant, absolutely, really delicious. Matthew's like, but no, really, really good. You know, anything like a game or anything like that, fabulous. Done. So yeah, you know, because pheasant isn't a strong flavor, you can get away with something like a spirit with it for sure. Sarah typing too quickly. Matthew's blaming Sarah. It's John, it's fabulous. So if you really like that, John, look out for people like Hewitt, Huard, and a gentleman called Didier Le Mortin. Drouin is also really good. There's some very, very good Calvados producers. And we're going to do our cognac show later on in April, and we're having Calvados as one of our guest spirits. So if you like that, then you'll love some of the Calvados we've got coming on that. So I thought to myself, we're the Whiskey Exchange. I'm gonna have to, oh yeah, perfect, nice one, Matthew. Yeah, we're the Whiskey Exchange. I better do some whiskey because I am a buyer of whiskey. I love whiskey, and chocolate and whiskey does work really, really well. And you know, when you're looking at chocolate and whiskey pairing, as I said, dark chocolates work really, really well with it. But also, actually, what I find is that yes, absolutely. I'll type up just before the end. I'll try and do an S. If David's listening, if you could type down some of the producers from the website, Hewitt, Huard, and Limorton, if David's listening. But yeah, but also sherry cask aged whiskies work really, really well. And if you think about it, that makes sense, because sherry in itself has like some dried fruit flavors. If you're talking kind of your Amontillado, your Olorosos, and your Pedro Jimenez's, you know, you get that richness and that dark flavors coming through on the spirit. Whereas your bourbon influenced ones would work better with milk chocolate, because you've got more of that kind of vanilla and that sort of more soft fruits coming through in the main. So the next one we're going to do, and actually what I'm going to do with this is, if you've still got your Hewitt, your Plantation, and your Cavallan's the next whiskey we're going to do. And with this one, I'm going to take the walnut. It's the walnut and marzipan. And again, here you've got two different, I mean, walnut's quite a bitter nut. And I think we don't really think about that sometimes. You know, different nuts have different characteristics. And walnut by its nature is quite bitter, whereas almond is quite sweet and floral. Almonds are quite a sort of vibrant flavor. And marzipan, again, you have that textural character. So if you have a little taste of that, you have that marzipan-y note. And then you have the bitterness of the walnut. And make sure you do get a little bit of the walnut, because the chocolate doesn't work quite as well. if you don't have a little bit of that bitterness from walnut. And Calvados is an amazing distillery in Taiwan. And I was very, very fortunate to be able to go there about 5 years ago. And it's insane. It has 1 million visitors to the distillery every year. That is more than the visitors to Scotland distilleries in total. I mean, that's insane. And it's like Disneyland. It's like coach loads of people. And with their kids, you have kids running around the distillery. I'm like, this is fun. Wish my parents had taken me here. But it's an amazing place. I mean, if you think about Taiwan, Taiwan's very, very hot. And you've got this amazing humidity as well. So like when you go into the cellars, into the warehouse, there are 8 floors. The first floor, you walk in and you just start sweating. I mean, I'm not a sweating person. I don't sweat very often, but I was literally covered. And I was like, what must the top be like? And if I was sweating that much from being in there for about half an hour, imagine a cask sitting in that environment for 3-4 years. And what happens is it's just that rapid extraction. One is pulling the oak back into the spirit, but also you're oxidizing the alcohols quite a lot. And so you get this kind of, these whiskies that taste a lot older than, say, their counterparts in Scotland, where the angel share is about 1%. So here it's 10 to 13%, which is huge. And if you smell that one, you can get that sherry cask straight away. You get those dried fruit aromas and everything like that. And then, so if you taste this with your chocolate, then what you're getting is Calvados quite a rich, it's quite a voluptuous style whiskey. There's quite a bit of fruit. And just with that chocolate, what's happening, especially with that walnut, is like those dried fruit characters that are coming through on the whiskey are just being sort of exaggerated by those chocolate, that chocolate, that walnut and that marzipan, because I need sweetness to combat the marzipan, but I need some dryness and some bigger flavors to combat that walnut note. So it's quite a tricky one to do. Now, if I look at the kind of one of the bonus ball chocolates, and actually, let's have a bit of fun here. You guys tell me which you think is the best with this. So if you take, it's the Hazelnut Cluster Dark. Now, hazelnut I love as a flavor. It's quite sweet, it's quite toasty, it's got this really, really distinct flavor. And you think of things like giandujas and stuff, they're quite kind of rich flavors. And this one almost has like a kind of crunchy sugar coating on it. But then you have the dark chocolate. So it's got this saltiness to it. And I was kind of going back and forth on this one because I tried it with my Fiji. And I quite liked it because the Fiji actually worked with the dark chocolate. I was pulling out some of those really nice flavors. With the Calvados, oh, that's not the Calvados. I've lost me Calvados. So with the Calvados, when I tried it with that hazelnut, it almost brought out more of the nuttiness from the Calvados, just on the finish. And then with that Calvados, I almost think this is it. It brought up a very interesting flavor in the Calvados. It almost brought out this slightly kind of dried, kind of autumnal leafy character, which wasn't there when I tried it with the walnut and marzipan. So, another thing that you can think about when you're thinking about food and drink pairing, Calvados I really like, is that different flavors will bring out different things in the chocolate or in the spirit. So, for me, definitely with that Calvados, with that walnut, that hazelnut, It's bringing out more nutty characters in the Cavalan. It's bringing more dried fruits with the Cavalan. Would any work with wine or champagne? Well, champagne and chocolate is tough. It can cope with, say, a very, very sort of like a white chocolate or something like that. Maybe more of a fruit-based chocolate. And definitely if you have something like a demi-sec or a slightly sweeter style champagne, it'll work better. The bubbles can cut through the chocolate, but for me, it just fights with the sweetness, because yes, you have a little bit of sweetness in champagne, but it really just is a little too aggressive. Now with wines, what it's going to do, if you have a red wine, it's going to bring out the tannin, which you don't want. If you have a sweet red wine, it's delicious, and we'll try with something with a port in a minute, but sort of Vin Doux Naturels, which are a port-like style red wines, work really well. Sparkling Shiraz can work really well with chocolate. And white wines, if you take something like an off-dry Riesling, it can just about cope with a lighter chocolate, but you want to really bring down the sugar levels and the flavors with chocolate and wine pairings, because they are definitely by their nature much, much tougher to do, unless you have a bit of sweetness, because what you're doing with a chocolate pairing and wine is you're bringing out dryness, and it just fights with it. So it is a bit of a tough one. But, you know, like, I think that go back and forth, have a little bit of a play, you know, test out, you know, it's almost like see what flavors bring out, you know. Actually, for me with that walnut, I actually went back to that Capavia, and it really brought out the prune. So if you have a little bit of that walnut one, a little bit more of that Capavia prune, that marzipan just brings out so much flavor in that prune distillate. It's absolutely delicious. So yeah, again, you know, it's like it's trying to see what brings out what flavors and what combinations work or don't work, you know. So if we head into the port, so port is the most undervalued, well, fortified wines in their entirety are the most not enjoying the Capavia. Yeah, you know, do you think it's just a bit too dry, Matthew and Sarah? Or, you know, what is it about it you don't like? It's kind of working out why it doesn't work for you and what you don't like it. On its own, we love it. That's okay. You don't need to, you don't need to like everything that I'm saying might work. But yeah, so fortified wines, totally amazing value for money. You know, if you look at a port, you can buy a port from the 1960s, the 1970s, and you're still not paying stupid money. You go to Bordeaux and you taste a Bordeaux from the same years and you're paying into thousands. So, you know, for me, port, Madeira, I love Madeira. I could drink Madeira all day long. And sherry are some of the most amazing value for money wines. Now, the problem is with fortified wines, we kind of look at what our granny did, which was have that lovely decanter that looked really pretty of port that sat on the sideboard, probably for about 10 years. And so our experience with port and a lot of fortified has been bad because we've not tasted them in the best conditions, or we have a preconception. But for me, they are so fantastic with food, especially anything sweet, and with cheeses. They just work. Why? Well, port, when you're making it, especially, and this is essentially, this is the Fonseca. This is a ruby port. So a ruby port is a young red port. Now, there's two different ways of making port, in an oxidative way or in a reductive way. So a ruby port or a red port, LBV, a vintage, they harvest the grapes, they bring them in, they crush them, and what they do in Porto, and you've probably seen the romantic pictures of like these big sort of kind of concrete vats and people jumping up and down. If anyone has the 2007 Taylor's port, my feet were in that. That's probably put you off the 2007 port for life, but it's the Vargelis if anyone's asking. And it's amazing, you know, and what they now do is they use what we call lagars, which are these automated sort of feet that kind of do the same thing. This is a ruby. I just saw it says tawny on the label. It's a ruby. I don't know where the tawny bit came from. I think that was just a typo from when we did the labels, but that very gentle extraction. So when you're getting a grape, the color, and you think about a grape is white in the center normally, and all the colors on the outside. So to extract color, you have to leave those grapes on the skins to take the color out into the juice. Now, at the same time, you're also pulling out what we call tannin. So tannin is this thing that kind of puckers your cheeks a little bit. Now, in a dry red wine, you want some tannin, especially something that's you want to age, or you want to kind of hold the fruit. In a port, you don't want too much tannin because actually you want the softness, the suppleness. So these lovely, gentle, kind of robotic feet just gently sort of almost massage the grapes to extract color, but not a lot of tannin. Now, if you have a ruby port or an LBV or a vintage, what's then going to happen is you put it into the fermentation, you put it into oak, but for a very short period of time, no more than say 3 years, and then you let it age in bottle. So it's aged what we call reductively without a lot of oxygen. Now you can see tawny ports. Tawny ports are the ones that are a little bit kind of more kind of browny in color. What they do is they spend the same process as the rubies and stuff. They go into the vats, but they stay in these big old vats for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And during that time, oxygen's just working on those. So they're just getting this lovely nutty character. So both work really well. I've gone with the Fonseca 27. So Fonseca 27 was essentially made to kind of mimic a ruby port, but to kind of appeal to a new customer. It's been going for about 50 years now. And with this one, I was going to pair it with the cassis, because for me, fruit and fruit, sometimes it's not brain surgery. Just do what the packet says, This is cassis. This tastes like black currant and black fruits. Job done. And with this one, because in a port, you stop fermentation before all the sugar is converted, you have about 20 grams per liter residual sugar left in this port. So actually, no, it must be higher actually. No, it's higher. Sorry, ignore that. It's about 100, maybe a bit under, about 70, 80 grams per liter residual. And that sweetness allows you, with those dark fruits, just to really capture that lovely bright fruit character, and works with the dark chocolate because you've got the dark chocolate, the dryness of that dark chocolate, but you've got the sweetness of the port, got those red fruit characters. And actually, if you think about dark chocolates, and chocolate's such an amazing thing. You can do chocolate tasting in the same way as you can do wine tasting or tea tasting, because there's so many different flavors that come from the different cacao farms, that come from the process of making the chocolates. This dark chocolate for me has that red berry fruit. So if on that cassis, you almost just take a bit of the dark chocolate off and leave the actual jelly behind, and you just taste that dark chocolate, I do get almost some really red berry fruits. And for me, it's just got this really lovely character that works super well. And it's a good question, Rory. Why have I put this before the peaty whiskey? 2 reasons. One, because that peaty whiskey is a higher ABV. So, and plus it's quite peaty. So I kind of was like, do I put one for the other, the other for the other? And then I just thought, do you know what? Because this is quite a young port, it's not got a really huge complexity. It's just a really delicious port. But I just thought it might fight a little bit after. But to be honest, I could have swapped them. I don't think it would really, really worry. But no, this is what I'm saying. This is a port that's, I think, sub 20 pounds. I believe Fonseca's 27, is maybe up to 25, I can't remember, but what great value for money for that port. You know, that's such a delicious drink. And, you know, you can use it with dark chocolates, you can use it with, like, say, if you're going to make a summer pudding. With hard cheeses, port's amazing. With blue cheese, port's amazing. You know, because it's just got that richness. It's got that slightly higher ABV, which is why I prefer, like, say, a port to a Bordeaux, because if you're having cheese is creamy, and that little bit higher ABV just allows you to cut through the creaminess of the cheese. And, you know, a blue cheese is quite big and intense, and so that big, rich fruit is just able to cut through it. And a Tawny would work equally. I mean, for me, the Tawny would probably work, I would say, more with either that hazelnut or potentially the walnut and marzipan, just because with a Tawny port, you're going to get much more nutty characters coming through on the port, not so much that red fruit. So just pairing it with something that reflects that sort of nuttiness is absolutely perfect. But yeah, this is big, it's rich, it's got a lot of flavor, and it just works nicely. And should you always air port? So good question. So different ports like different things. Now, when you're sort of decanting a wine, what you're doing is adding air into it because you want to release flavors. Now, also, you're decanting wine to take it off what we call, there may be some sediment on it. So if you have a vintage port, especially an old vintage port, there will be sediment. So you may want to decant it to take it off the sediment. Now, once you've put air into it, it's going to evolve very, very rapidly. So you don't want it sitting on your sideboard for days or even weeks, months, forget it. You know, like for me, once you have a bottle of port open, put it in the fridge. It will extend the shelf life definitely to 3 weeks or so. But if you leave it outside, it's going to rapidly deteriorate, and you've probably got a week, week and a half on the outside. So you can bring it up to temperature. Again, that slowing it down will just protect that port. Tawny ports, by their nature, because they're oxidatively aged, have a better ability to age once they've got oxygen in them. They'll keep a bit longer. A vintage port, if it's an old vintage port, you really want to drink it there and then, because it's going to disintegrate quite quickly if you're not careful. So if you taste something and you're not sure whether you decant it or not, if it feels quite tight and you just feel you're not getting a lot of fruit out of it, decant it. You can always decant it into a jug. You don't need to have a fancy, beautiful decanter. Just whack it in a jug, it'll be fine. And then pop it back in a bottle. How long does a whiskey last decanted? So whiskey or spirits, by their nature, can hold, they're not as affected by oxygen. What you do find is that they do change. You know, I always say to people, and people think I'm crazy when I'm like, leave your whiskey in the glass to open up. You know, it's just going to be great for it. You know, just get a little bit of air to it. But after a while, by the time you're kind of moving down in the bottle where you've got more air to liquid, that's when you want to bring it into a smaller container to preserve the flavors, because it will just start losing flavors, and you will just end up with a bit of alcohol and a bit of wood. So there's no real hard and fast rule to it, but I would just say once you've got more air to whiskey or spirit, then bring it into a smaller container, and that counts for a bottle as well. So, you know, keep those little small bottles that you get and decant back down in. You know, so actually keep those, and if you have an amazing whiskey, it'll wash it out and keep it for the amazing whiskey, or just drink it quickly. Yes. But you know, so it's like anything, you know, if you have a sherry, we often leave sherry open too long. Like a Fino sherry is exactly like a white wine, a week, maybe a little bit longer. You know, so it's a lot about some of our bad experiences on certain products, like a Amontillado and an Oloroso can last a lot longer because, again, they're oxidatively aged. You know, a lot of our bad experiences come from by not storing or not taking care of those products correctly, and drinking them probably a bit too old. So are we ready for the peaty beast? Now this is kind of, peat is a Marmite thing. You either love it or you hate it. I'm a big peat fan. And the last one we're going to try it with is it's the salted caramel, the sea salt caramel dark. And, you know, this one was an obvious one for me. I kind of was like, if anything's going to work with the whiskey, it's one that's got a little bit of dark chocolate, of course, but that little saltiness with peat is fabulous. And this is from the Isle of Mull. It's from the Tobermory distillery, and this is it's the Leche, and it's the 10-year-old. So it's the last whiskey there. And so with sea salt, I mean, like salted chocolates, especially salted caramel, is such a on-trend flavor now. You know, it's kind of one of those things that I think has become more and more popular. Sorry, my camera's doing funny things again. And it is kind of, it's a great thing actually, because salt by its nature opens your taste buds. So the reason we put salt onto food is, one, it helps break down proteins, and two, it also really opens our taste buds, which we often don't think about. So if you take a little bit of that salted caramel, you've got that dark chocolate, that bitterness, I love that sweetness, and actually my mouth's salivating a little bit, and that's that salt doing that to me. And then have a little bit of that peated whiskey. Now, if you're not a big peat fan, just take a little drop and put it on your palate. Because actually, I sometimes find with food, it helps you kind of get along with peated whiskey, because it almost kind of softens that smokiness a little bit. It brings out those dark chocolate flavors. Like, it's really funny. That dark chocolate kind of faded. And now I've had the whiskey, it's coming back, and I'm almost getting this really lovely kind of bitter dark chocolate finish. And that saltiness is just working almost with the saltiness in the whiskey. Like, the whiskey in itself is actually quite salty. Yuck. And yeah, as I said, peated whiskey is Marmite, you know, you either love it or you hate it. Nothing in between. But it does work. I do find peated whiskey works really, really well with chocolate. And I think it's something about, you know, if you have a chocolate, actually sometimes those dark chocolates can have a slight smoky edge to them. In fact, actually one of my favorite like pairings in the world was Talisker 10 on a fresh oyster. So literally you just dribble some Talisker 10, like about 10 mils onto the oyster, and then knock it back, and it's absolutely delicious, because peat is quite salty, you know, it has it. Just tried it with honey. Yes, absolutely. Completely right, Lorna. You know, that honey and caramel will also work, because this is, the trigger's influenced by bourbon cask, so you've got those vanilla notes to it. And actually that's why, you know, this one will work really nicely with a lot of different ones. And your sort of last bonus ball is that dark chocolate, which actually, if you have the dark chocolate, you can try it with the Cavalan, you can try it with the port, and you can try it with the Leche. And it just works super well. Yeah, Kilchoman, fabulous. Actually, Kilchoman did a lime and sea salt. I think they sent me one for Christmas, chocolate. But yeah, that salted chocolate works really, really well with peat. So salted caramel, anything that's got a little bit of sort of salty chocolate. Whereas the more nutty whiskies work better with, say, your sherries, your sherry influenced whiskies. Try that dark chocolate. Oh, sorry. I keep moving, my camera doesn't like it. Actually, try that dark one with that Calvados. I think that's going to work really nicely. No, a little too dry. Makes the Calvados a little too dry. And that's the thing, you know, go back and forth, test, try it out. Yeah, prune too dry. No, I think it's going to be the best with peaty whiskey. or that Cavalan. Should we have leftovers? Lorna, you're going to be running around your sitting room like crazy with eating that much chocolate. I would be like, I have leftovers. Do you want to come down the office? Yeah, you know, it's kind of like having a little taste. That dark chocolate works better with those sort of darker, rich flavors from the whiskies. And I think that's where, you know, these kind of pairings come alive. And actually that dark chocolate with the port, delicious. Yeah, with the stem ginger, that will also work really well because you've got that lovely sort of saltiness and that peatiness. Peat is a strong flavor, so you can actually put peated whiskies up against a lot of strong flavors as well. And actually, it can be a really nice vehicle for quite saline things. So actually, you know, if you think about a smoked salmon, the ABV on the whiskey cuts through the kind of oiliness of a smoked salmon. The smokiness complements the flavor of the smoked salmon. And especially if something that's been aged in, say, a bourbon cask, then you get the sweetness of the fruit, which works with salmon, which is actually quite a fruity, it's quite a kind of flavorful, ripe, kind of rich style food, which actually probably wouldn't work quite as well with maybe a sherry cask influence, because you need that fruit. That fruit is so important to hold the flavors there. You know, camera's doing funny things. I don't know if it's just me seeing myself on the screen that's going fuzzy, or if I am going fuzzy. But, you know, it's just going back and forth, trying them out, playing around. What works? What doesn't work? What do you like? You know, like what I like isn't necessarily what you like. We're all getting fuzzy. This is the point. You all start asking questions now. This is the good bit. But yeah, you know, try out different things, different flavors. Yeah, if you're cooking a dinner tonight and you're, say, doing, I don't know, a beef Wellington, try the Cavalan with your beef Wellington. Or, you know, if you're having a fish pie, try the Le Chic, you know, or even actually the Calvados would work beautifully with a fish pie. You know, try it out, taste it, go back, play around with it, because it doesn't matter. You know, we all think that actually it should be wine with food, truffle with the gin. Yeah, you know, like just have a go, have some fun. But remember that, you know, the key things when you're pairing food and drink, look at the texture of the food and the liquid. Look at the flavors that are present in the food and the liquid. So if you know you have red fruits as a flavor in either a sauce or in the wine, then try and pair it with something that's got red fruits as a flavor note in the actual product. And if you're, my goodness, I really am moving far too much for this camera today. And you know, if you've got something that's got quite a lot of kind of oiliness or creaminess, something with a higher ABV, something with a higher acidity, to cut through that is really key. So, you know, really kind of think about those kind of contradictions, those contrasts and flavors. You know, it's about kind of just looking at what are the key components of the dish or the wine. I mean, why? Who the hell said you had to have pick the wine after you pick what you're eating? Pick the wine and then decide what to cook with it. Much better good idea, you know, because then you just drink what you want and then you eat what you want and you don't have to stress yourself about either. But, you know, I hope that today you've kind of had a bit of fun. You've learned maybe a little bit about kind of different flavors and how they work, and not just going with the classics, because, you know, we can all be very kind of down the road and stick to within the path of what we believe is right. But actually there's oftentimes, if you just step outside the box and just think a little bit kind of laterally, there's some really fun flavor combinations you can do. And, you know, like when I was doing this tasting, as I said, I surprised myself with some stuff that I thought would work. And I was like, just doesn't work. Whereas actually things that I never thought I would put with a chocolate just worked. So, you know, really, really have fun with it. Just, you know, try different things, because it is fun. You know, food and drink pairing should be fun. It shouldn't be serious. It should just be fun, because it's two great things: food, alcohol. What more do you need in life?